Today we are delighted to be speaking with Dr. Bernhard Ott. Dr. Ott has been involved in theological education and academic leadership for more than 35 years. He served for many years as the academic dean of the European School of Culture and Theology in Korntal, Germany, and he currently serves as the chairman of the European Evangelical Accreditation Association. Dr. Ott is the author of the text that we'll be discussing today, Understanding and Developing Theological Education, available from the ICET series. Dr. Ott, we're very grateful to be speaking with you today.
It's a privilege to be here.
Dr. Ott, you open the book with a sobering reminder of the fragility of institutions of theological education. What are the most pressing signs that theological education is indeed in upheaval? And do you see these trends leading to the increased stability or increased volatility of institutions of theological education?
Yeah, this is a good question to start with, because especially in the West, in Western theological education, talking about Europe and North America, there we have the real thing. I mean, theological education as such, what it is. And then we have all those surrounding aspects and elements: money, marketing, organization, campus, sustainability of campuses, accreditation, quality assurance, all sorts of assessment, the academic world, being in a peer situation, just proving your academic quality, and so on. So there are lots of things around the actual act of doing theological education. And it seems to me that these surrounding elements are driving theological education. And the real thing somehow tries to follow. And I think this is not a good development at all. If I talk to academic deans, to presidents in the US, here in Europe, I mean, they are just preoccupied with surviving. Financially, academically, accreditation visits coming up, the whole business, the institutional business is the main thing. And thinking about what actually are we doing does not really get the attention that it would deserve.
How long has this been the case, particularly for institutions in the European context?
I mean, it's connected to professionalization. It's connected to government recognition and accreditation, especially in Europe, where we have, compared to the North American situation, smaller Bible colleges and seminaries. If you move into accreditation, government accreditation, for instance, in Germany, and several evangelical schools have done this, you have to go through a huge process, which actually is designed for universities. But at smaller college, you have to go through this. It's a matter of competition. We have many schools and not so many students. So it's a competition issue. Administration has become just broad and has developed in many ways. So it's just part of a sophisticated, complicated, complex world.
Mm-hmm. Recently, we understand that schools in the U.S., United States Bible colleges, have been experiencing student decline, and I teach at one such institution, at Moody Bible Institute, where we are aware of such trends, and this seems to have been only a very recent trend, perhaps in the last 2 years or so. You alluded to the question also of European schools facing declining numbers of students, or at least in some form of decline. Would you be willing to comment further?
I do not have recent and exact figures now on European schools, but certainly schools are not growing. There may be a certain shift from one type of institution to another type of institution. And of course, diversification and new media coming in and the whole e-learning development and so on has shifted students from more traditional Bible colleges to more flexible and new modes of delivery and so on. I mean, again, the reasons are many. I think schools moving toward accreditation and higher academic quality, they are gaining some new students, but also churches and mission agencies are asking, do we really need academics? And new schools not focusing on academic training are appearing and attracting students. It's a diversification. We have many more schools, but less students in one particular school, is my observation. Yeah.
And in your experience, is the upheaval that we are discussing and is outlined in chapter 1 of your book, is that something that has been a series of gradual changes, or as we look back, can we identify one or a handful of major trends that have created this new situation?
Maybe both. I mean, it is a gradual development, but of course this gradual development includes some major shifts. One shift has certainly to do moving from the traditional Bible school model, where you have residential schools, where you have almost everything integrated, Bible knowledge, spiritual formation, character formation, shaping people's life over years, to more flexibility, to part-time studies, to older age students studying, second career people studying, and so on. I guess it's quite similar to the North American development, just a bit later in Europe. And this has just completely changed. And I'm not saying this is the wrong development. It's just a set of very new challenges. How can you provide good theological training in this changing situation?
Thank you so much for your reflection. Dr. Ott, one of the reoccurring themes of the text that you write, again, understanding and developing theological education available from the Langham Library. One of the reoccurring themes of the book is that education should be run not from above and behind, but from below and the front. And what I understand you mean by this is that curricula should not be determined by the history of an institution and by the administrative politics of that institution, but rather that innovation should be market-driven and entrepreneurial. What are the questions that administrators should be asking themselves to determine the relative orientation of change at their own institutions?
Maybe 2 or 3 issues. If I look at schools, especially in connection with accreditation visits in Europe, and maybe I should say the European Evangelical Accrediting Association covers a quite diverse territory, from traditional Central European, Western European countries with long Bible school and Bible college tradition. Some of the Middle Eastern schools are integrated, now Eastern European schools. So if I visit a small Bible college in Portugal, or the Evangelical Seminary in Kiev, or I go to Beirut or Cairo, that's something different than going to one of the German schools or some of the Austrian schools. So it's quite different. But if I look at those schools which have this sense of innovation and looking ahead, and these are the schools, they take time for that. If the administration of a school, if the leadership of a school is completely preoccupied with running the schools at the limit of their energy and force in order to satisfy accreditation and everything, but they do not have time to retreat and to think and to pray and to look ahead. This is one thing I realize. Where I see innovation, normally you have a process of taking time, of having retreats, of interacting with people outside the school, and just think about the ideas and about the future. The second observation is schools which have some sort of innovation, looking ahead, just not doing what they've done all the time, are linked somehow globally to the global church and mission movement, because many of the creative ideas and challenges come from the global developments. And global today, not in Europe especially, not only means going to faraway places. People are coming, linking with the migrant community, linking with the refugee community, and just being involved with more than the traditional European schools and churches. So this opens the horizon for what is needed in 5 or 10 or 15 years. So this is two things I observe.
Thank you so much for that reflection, Dr. Ott. Dr. Ott, given the realities of globalization, what can we as theological educators do in order to ensure that the courses that we teach today maintain an appropriate balance such that they are relevant to the specific students in our classrooms, but at the same time that they prepare students to serve and minister in a global context?
Yeah, I mean, it's not just the issue of globalization, it's added to it the issue of rapid change. And this means to me that we have to think carefully about what we do in theological education. I need two foresight. We have focused either on content. Do we have proper theology? And especially evangelical theological schools, conservative schools have been concerned with the proper theology many times in the form of propositional truth statements. Do our students really have the right theology? The other issue then is skills. What are the skills needed? And very often I observe the skills we are looking for are very just what we need today and tomorrow. Right now in churches, we need this type of worship leader, and we need this type of preacher, and we need this type of leadership person, and we prepare for very specific skills. And I think content and skills is not sufficient. We need to train and to learn how to theologize, doing theology. I often say to my students, you know, we can now talk about skills, and we can even talk about content, but 10 years from now, and in a different culture, on a different continent, you may have to do theology and rethink your theology, and what we do in homiletics may not work over there. So it's not just what you learn in terms of content or in terms of skills, but you have to learn how to develop your own theology and your own skills in context. And I think we are learning it, but we are behind, focusing on how to theologize and how to develop skills in context.
If I may ask for a reading recommendation or perhaps some sources that best articulate your vision of how we can learn to do this rich, long-lasting theology that you're describing. How does one approach that?
Yeah, I mean, one of the books I love to recommend is my colleague Perry Shaw's book on curriculum development. Transforming Theological Education, I guess, is the title. He is working with us in the accreditation work, working at the Baptist Seminary in Beirut, and just the way he talks about learning processes pedagogically and about curriculum develop covers a lot of what I'm talking about.
Dr. Ott, one of the dangers that you warn academic administrators against is additionalism. In the place of additionalism, you recommend that administrators take proactive control of the curriculum. First, what are the signs of additionalism in a theological school, and then what can be done about it, both by faculty and administrators, to avoid this pitfall? Thank you.
I like this topic because this is really what I observe. You know, additionalism is what I call additionalism is the attitude. There are more and more topics coming up which somehow have to be brought into the curriculum. There are new tasks in church life. There are new professional profiles needed in the mission work, and then you add When I studied in the US 35 years ago, this was the beginning of the spiritual formation movement. So all the seminaries started adding courses in spiritual formation. So I took some of those early courses in spiritual formation. So they added something to spiritual formation. Later, many other things came up. So you constantly add to the curriculum new topics, new themes, because new things are needed in practice in the churches in mission. This very quickly leads to tension and battles in the seminaries and colleges, how to distribute the credit hours available for a certain degree. Parallel to this development, you have the constant shortening of degrees. So the college I'm working with in Germany, European School of Culture and Theology, is linked to Columbia International University. So we are constantly confronted with the idea and the development of shortening degrees because of the competition. If the larger seminaries start shortening the degrees, everybody has to do its job. But then you have to do more different items in less time. So this is what I call additionalism. You add, but there is no space actually to add. Several years ago, I visited one of my friends in the US, academic dean of a seminary, and he was just preparing for an accreditation visit, curriculum revision, preparing the reports and so on. And I asked him, what are the major challenges for you in this situation? And his immediate response was just the internal battles. Probably the biblical scholars, they will lose again. And because there are more practical courses have to be added because of the demand. You understand the problem? This is what yeah. So I think we have to think very carefully about this. Certain things, especially those aspects which represent the ethos of a school, which are the core, the center of what a school is, cannot just be added. They have to go into everything in the curriculum. So if you say, we need a stronger emphasis in mission, let's add mission courses, maybe even hire another mission professor, that's fine. But if a school wants to become more mission-minded, everyone, from the Greek professor to the hermeneutics professor, have to think missionally. And how can you move away from just adding to the dimensions of everything? And at least the core values and the ethos of a school has to move into every course and into the heart and the practice of every professor. It cannot just be added by adding 2 more courses and hiring another professor. This is what I'm talking about.
And I think the tensions that you are articulating are probably faced by the majority of schools. What is it that we can do as individual faculty members or administrators to fight this trend to reach a greater goal?
Identify your core values and the center of a school. What are the core themes and core topics which have to shape just the values of a school? And then to ask, how can they be integrated into everything? There's nothing to say against specific courses on mission, on spiritual formation or whatever. But it also always has to be carried, so to speak, by the spirit in all the courses. And this has to be done very intentionally. So if a school wants to be more missional in what they do, the church historian and the Old Testament scholar and the New Testament teacher and the systematic theologians, they have to think about, is my teaching in church history missional or not? It has to become into everything. And then, of course, this again needs time, collaboration, and interaction within a faculty. And it already needs to be part of the recruitment process for new faculty. If I hire a new Old Testament teacher, It's not just a place where he can shape his or her career as an Old Testament scholar interacting with the world of Old Testament scholars, but is he the person who character formation or spiritual formation or mission-mindedness or whatever is the heart of his or her Old Testament teaching? So we have to be very intentional at certain points.
Dr. Ott, what do you see as the most effective way to prepare for a leadership role, perhaps in administration, in an institution of theological education?
Maybe it helps to understand again, there is a very foundational issue in theological education. It is the same assumption as in many other fields. We are trained theologians. Then someday we move into theological education. But we are not trained educators. So theological education has to bring together theology and education. Now this means especially those in leadership responsibility, academic deans, principals, presidents, and so on, people who lead theological education need to have some educational understanding. I'm saying maybe a bit critical, not just theology and leadership, but also education. And we have not many places in the world where you can learn how to do theological education. This is why we have developed at the college in Germany a Ph.D. in international theological education. So where leaders of theological institutions think educationally about theological education. And if you want to give leadership to an institution, you need to have this educational component.
Dr. Ott, if I could close with a question that I've been asking each of the interviewees on this program, and that is this: what would it mean for the church today to be united? How would we recognize this unity, and what is it that we can do to pursue the unity for which Jesus prayed in John 17?
I mean, this is a huge question. But I mean, it's one of my heart questions. Let me start by referring to a metaphor. The unity of the church, for me, is like a choir with many voices. We sing in parts. It's great to have the different parts. Not everyone has to sing exactly the same part. So if we can have this sort of understanding, you need places where you sing and learn good quality in your part, but then you need places where you sing together. I would say this is the metaphor I use when I talk to students about this. There are two things they have to be there. Everyone has to look at the same sheet, which in the metaphor is the Bible. So you can't sing with this choir if you don't have the right sheet in front of you. And we all have to look to the same choir director, who is Jesus. So these are two components which are necessary to have this sort of choir. Now, if I use this metaphor and I go to theological education again, this must be part of a curriculum of theological education. How do we sing in the larger choir? You can say without metaphor, there is an ecumenical competence. And in our theological schools, students have to learn this ecumenical competence, which means talking to people of other confessions, talking to people of other traditions, learning to listen, to appreciate, but also to fight in a fair way about different issues. So there, I would say, especially in evangelical theological education, we have not done our homework yet. Because we very often in theological schools, we very quickly know all the others, they are wrong. And we are training the right way here, but we do not learn to interact ecumenically in a meaningful way because we fear that we will lose something. But the choir metaphor helps me to be clear about we need the Bible, we need the choir director. It's fully okay to learn the Baptist way or the Mennonite way or the Lutheran way. You know when to sing, but then you have to learn to sing together as a choir. So this is my vision, that we train this in the theological schools.
It has been our delight today to be speaking with Dr. Bernhard Ott, author of Understanding and Developing Theological Education, available from ISET, formerly academic dean of the European School of Culture and Theology in Korntal, Germany, and currently serving as the chairman of the European Evangelical Accreditation Association. Dr. Ott, thank you so much for your time and comments today.
Thank you. It was a privilege.